Okay, thank you for everyone who stuck around after that break. As Iris said, I'm with MAFWA, the Midwest Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, and I helped lead the process of creating the Mid-America Monarch Conservation Strategy, which a lot of you have probably already heard about. So I'm not going to dwell on that very long, but I'm going to give kind of an update on that, and then move into more specific right-of-way talk and about a survey that many of you participated in recently, and then we'll again move into those small group discussions. So just as an overview of the Mid-America strategy, it covers a 16-state region in the Mid-America region, kind of the Midwest and the South Central states of the country. It's a 20-year strategy running from 2018 to 2038. It sets a goal of adding 1.3 billion additional stems to the landscape. Basically in the Midwest, it's in the North Core Conservation Unit. If any of you have seen that map from the service, I didn't include it here because I'm trying to get through it quickly. But the strategy takes a sector-based approach to habitat creation and management, much like the All Hands on Deck, Thog-Martin et al. Paper. So those sectors are agricultural private lands, rights-of-way, protected natural lands, or some people might think of those as public lands, and then urban and developed lands. So there's a whole chapter on rights-of-way, and actually includes a little bit about other energy lands that energy companies control. That was developed actually by a technical work group. Many of the people from the Rights-of-Way as Habitat Working Group were included on that technical work group. So thank you to everyone who has participated in that. And I just wanted you to know that this group did have a hand in developing that. I also want to note, as has been noted earlier, is that WAFWA, the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, is currently developing a similar regional strategy for the Western states and the Western population of monarchs. So the strategies that are laid out for rights-of-way in the Mid-America strategy document, they weren't actually put into these categories necessarily in that document, but for the purposes of moving from planning to implementation, I worked with Iris and Monarch Joint Venture to kind of put these strategies into clearer categories so that we could start talking to you all, the industry and conservation partners, about the challenges and the solutions that may be evident to you all, and kind of put them into these categories so that we could talk about them more clearly. So you can see those categories on the screen. I think they're a little bit self-explanatory, but just so you know, existing right-of-way veg management would include things like altering the timing of or frequency of mowing, or the application of herbicide, new construction and revegetation projects. So that would mean altering your seed mixes that you put in that process. Changing contracting practices would include maybe working with specialized contractors. Many of you are here today kind of fill that gap. And then some other things that have also come up earlier today, training employees, basically to actually implement things on the ground, but to gain buy-in from the people in your organization. Outreach and communications to internal and external stakeholders. And then finally, monitoring and data management was the 6th category of strategies. So we sent out a survey. I realized that a lot of you got a lot of surveys recently, so I didn't know about that. But thank you to those of you who filled out the one that Iris sent out on behalf of the Mid-America group. And for each of those 6 strategies, we asked the same questions of the people who took the survey, and that was, is your organization currently implementing the strategy? How likely are you to implement this in the future? What are the primary challenges to implementing that strategy? What are some solutions that conservation partners in particular could offer to address those challenges? And then how effective do you think that whole category of strategies is kind of in the whole effort to put more habitat on the ground? So we had 37 responses that were completed from industry partners and DOTs. I'm just going to go through the results of that really quickly. So for existing right-of-way vegetation management, you can see that we had a little less than half of the respondents saying that they're currently implementing strategies that are aimed at benefiting monarchs on existing rights-of-way. A lot of partial, so yellow is the partial, sorry, I should tell you. Green is currently implementing, yellow is partially implementing, and red is not implementing. And then the likely to implement in the future, again, green is likely, yellow is possibly, and red is unlikely. So you can see that not a lot are actually implementing monarch-specific right-of-way vegetation management currently, but there's a lot of intention to do so in the future. In terms of monarch-friendly practices on new construction and revegetation projects, there's a little more fully implementing right now currently, a lot partial implementation, and then again, a lot of intent to do that in the future, or seeing that that will be more likely in the future. Modifying contracts or changing the way that who you work with or how you work with to influence monarch-friendly practices on the ground had a lot less current implementation. There's a lot of organizations that said they aren't doing that now. But again, you can see the majority of organizations said they would like to do that in the future, or think that it is likely they will. Employee training was also not highly fully implemented right now, focused on monarch-specific practices. A little over half said partial implementation of that. I'll talk about that in a minute. But then you can see that everyone said that it's either likely or possible that they will implement employee training in the future for monarch-friendly practices. Outreach and communication, we had a lot more implementation of that currently. I think a lot of organizations see the benefit of kind of reaching out to the public and having that good PR with what you're providing for monarchs and pollinators. So a lot of that is being implemented so far, and if not, very likely to do so in the future. And then the least level of implementation really occurred when we asked about, are you monitoring vegetation on your rights of way right now? A little bit of partial. Some people said yes. Some responses said yes, we've been doing this for 30 years. But a lot of organizations are not doing that right now. So just in general, you can see that there's a range of implementation across these different strategies. But for all of them, there seems to be a pretty sure bet that you're going to in the future. You think that it's possible or even likely that these will be implemented going into the future. Finally, we asked to rank the effectiveness of these strategies, and you can see these are kind of listed in order of least effective to most effective from top to bottom. So existing right-of-way vegetation management is seen as most effective at providing additional monarch habitat on the ground, followed closely by practices during new construction and revegetation projects, employee training, and so on and so forth. So I just want to give a summary of what people wrote in the text boxes. So all of those previous questions were kind of like ranking or clicking buttons, but I also went through and just kind of clumped together what people generally said about implementation, challenges, and solutions. So you may have noticed before that there are a lot of partial answers to the implementation questions, and when people provided comments about that, it seemed to be because either it's being implemented, but it's not specifically for monarchs. So you might have been doing work to benefit pollinators or native vegetation, but you haven't billed it as monarch work specifically. And then another thing is that a lot of organizations have specific project areas where they're doing something for monarchs, but it's not system-wide, so they answered partial. The two categories that had the highest level of current implementation were outreach and education activities, and then monarch-friendly vegetation on new construction revegetation projects. And a lot of people also said in their comments that the reason they say that it's likely that this implementation will increase in the future is because of participation in the Monarch CCAA. So a lot of people are, a lot of organizations recognize they might not be doing this now, but they will as part of that CCAA agreement. In terms of challenges, there was pretty universal agreement that there were limits in funding, staffing, training, also lack of support from leadership and management, and sometimes from politicians was brought up. There are also some issues with laws and policies that prevent people from implementing certain things. And also, this has been brought up today as well, that organizations are struggling to comply with regulations related to all of the other threatened and endangered species that are out there on the landscape. And so adding considerations for another species that is not even regulated yet is kind of hard to do. And finally, as far as support, there were recommendations, pretty clear recommendations for off-the-shelf products, whether that's from conservation partners or consultants, that these organizations can use to provide guidance about seed mixes, about management practices, even kind of off-the-shelf templates for outreach and communication to the public or within the organization. And also, there's a desire for other organizations to provide case studies and cost-benefit analyses so that your organization can say, look, these people did it, it didn't cost them more, and it worked. So just as an aside about the responses on this survey to monitoring, there was near universal agreement that if you aren't implementing vegetation monitoring, it's time, money, and expertise are the limiting factors, and therefore addressing those challenges would require more time, money, and expertise. And also, it was mentioned that a simplified protocol that people can implement would be nice. And so, as we heard earlier, such a protocol is under development. So we're not going to talk about that anymore today in these small group exercises. We're just kind of going to table the vegetation monitoring discussion for the groups that are already working on that. And also the Monarch CCAA, if the organization is participating in that, there will be a component of monitoring that you have to do anyway. So we're going to move into the small group worksheet activity. The purpose of this is to refine the information and perhaps add to the information that we gathered from this survey. It's primarily based around ranking exercises. We'd also like to provide a forum for you to share ideas and solutions with your colleagues here, and to create clear recommendations, hopefully, for the meeting that is occurring about a month from now in Nebraska. It's a Monarch Conservation Partners meeting, co-hosted with MAFWA and Monarch Joint Venture. So there'll be a lot of kind of conservation organization, governmental representatives there, and we want to have something from this group of people here that can help guide what they discussed there at that meeting. So we have about 45 minutes to do kind of all of this, which is part of it is an individual exercise and completing worksheets by yourself. And then you'll move on to discussing in small groups. There's another exercise for the small groups. And then a time at the end of today for you to share what you came up with at your tables with this larger group if you want. We're not going to force you to do it. And I do also want to say that the worksheets will be collected at the end of the day. That's kind of how we're going to be able to pull this all together into something to bring to the next meeting and to report back to you, of course. So this is not on the screen, but if you can write what kind of organization you represent at the top of your sheet, you don't have to write who you are, but it would be nice for us to know if it's a DOT or a utility or a consultant or a government agency. Be helpful for us. And finally, I thought I was done. I forgot about this slide. A couple of things to keep in mind. I mentioned earlier that there were 6 categories of strategies that we asked about in the survey. Those have been condensed to 3 for the purpose of this exercise. So, we got rid of the monitoring. I already told you that. We're tabling the monitoring discussion. But we also kind of just put contracting issues into the existing vegetation management and the new construction categories. So contractor issues are kind of included in those 2. And then we put training, education, and outreach all together in one category, just so no one's confused. And again, steps 1 and 2, so the first 2 things you do are individual, and then the steps 3 and 4 are to occur at your small group tables. So I think that's it.